want things to happen, but the board, the superintendent, and the staff were all considered to be insiders, right? They knew what was going on, and they were kind of gonna do their thing, and we didn't necessarily have a lot of control of it as owners and customers. It was a step-up approach where the superintendent essentially said, hey, board, here's what I wanna do. And the board would say, okay, yeah, why don't you do that? That sounds good. And so it was kind of like the superintendent had the ideas, the board would rubber stamp those ideas and say, yep, good, go with it. Another way to look at governance would be shifting that line down, and instead of the board being one of the management or insiders, they are part of the governance piece. The owners, the board are part of the owners, and the board are the voice of the owners. In the end, the customers benefit from the work that's done from the governance and the management. And this is a step-down approach. This would be the ownership lets the board know, here's what we want, so the board can then govern by policy with that. So the first principle is that the board is a trustee for its community of owners, okay? There can be an appearance of trusteeship where the organization's already in place, the CEO or superintendent's already hired, the stakeholder groups elect proxies, and that would be the board. The proxies have allegiance to interest groups, maybe people who got them elected, people who talked them into running for the board. Board members act independently based on what those interest groups have told them they want. The staff makes recommendations, and the board makes management decisions. In that situation, the board-staff relationship is that of advice. The board advises the staff of what they should do. The engagement in that form of governance is really that the district informs the community, here's what we're doing. All right? The board monitors and evaluates the superintendent's actions and attributes. So what did you do, and are you a good person? Do we like you? The dividing line between the outsiders and the insiders would be all of our owners, and the board and everyone else, board superintendent and staff below that. In a true trusteeship type of governance, you've got a community of owners that selects representatives, and that's the board. The board will stand in for all owners and act as one. The board hires a CEO who hires staff and runs the organization. And the board exercises authority by listening to owners. The board-staff relationship then becomes a command, and that command is via our policies. So when we set policy, that is a command to the superintendent, here's what we want done. The board then monitors and evaluates the results of those policies, or of the district in trying to retain those policies, and then whether or not the superintendent's compliant with the policies. It has nothing to do with the personality of the superintendent, whether we like him or the measurable results we can tell. It shifts that dividing line then to be between the community and owners and the board, and then all the staff of the district on the other side of the line. You guys following me on this? So if you've never been in on a board before, it might be kind of new to think of either concept. But I'll tell you too, it took, I'm still learning from policy governance, and we've been doing it for 5 or 6 years, and so I'm always learning, and so don't feel bad if at first you're like not quite wrapping your head around it. Join the club.
So the trustee one is what we actually do. The other one was an example of another system. The trusteeship is what the governance is.
The first one was a typical board. I'm not just talking about school boards. These are boards of companies too. Boards of large corporations, those kind of things. It acts like that as well.
So we're going to use a football analogy, and Lombardi might have said, get to the goal line, stay in bounds, but get there. And there's relation to that with how policy governance works. We need to identify the desired results. Of course, if this is a football field, you want to get to the end zone. You know, that's the end result that you want. That's what we want. Those are our ends. We set the boundaries. We'll learn a little bit that those are executive limitations that we set that are part of policy governance. So we're basically saying, you know, this is the football, this is the school district, in this case, Dr. Her superintendent. Get to the end zone, we're gonna set some limits on you, but we're gonna let you move throughout the field however you think you can, as long as you stay within these limits, stay within the sidelines, you know, and then allow your players the freedom to respond to situations on the field. So as we go along here, you'll get into what ELs are and BSRs and GPs and everything else, and you'll understand a little bit of the green section here, which is later gonna be identified as the means. So we're gonna give you some freedom, get to where we want you to get, but you can't just wave your wand and do whatever you want, you being the superintendent. You can't just wake up one morning and say, you know what, just because I am the boss here, I'm gonna do things my way and change it all up. That is, in a nutshell, policy governance. Basically, it's a structure to not let that happen. Principle number 3, the board's role in guiding operational means is to limit the executive's choices. An example, tell the superintendent what would be unacceptable. Again, you don't give him free rein. He can do whatever he wants when he wants. You know? Limit choices, tie their hands. Is that what we want to do? Is that what the school board wants? Do we want to be the one that says this is what you're going to do and only this and nothing else? That's not what it is. While we give them some parameters, we give them these boundaries, we expect them to stay within those things, so it's not the tying of hand. So the means is basically the executive limits that we implement to get to the desired results, which are our ends. We have 3 ends. We have synthesized them or made them broader, but they're narrowed down to 3 ends. You know, we set these executive limitations. These are if you go back to the football field, they're the sidelines. You know, we're telling the superintendent, you know, this is your field, these are the limits that we have. You know, but these are the available means. You got this green area where you can go whichever direction you want, but stay within these boundaries or these sidelines that we set for you to get to the desired results.
So this would be, and we haven't talked about executive limitations yet, this would be the limitations we have put on the superintendent, right? But the green is still all the available means that he has to reach those desired ends. So there's still room to move. The more that we expand our executive limitations, the less available means the superintendent has. So we keep that in mind as a board too. We don't want to be so detailed in it that we tie his hands to the point where he's like, we're basically saying, here's how you're going to do it. We want to leave some leeway. That's his expertise.
Principle number 4, the board must create a relationship with the superintendent that is empowering, creating an environment where it is safe to take action. Again, this is just another visual of the limitations we set. Like Rob said, if we had more red on this chart here, where is the autonomy to be able to do some of the things that we wanted to do without us having to go say, hey, you need to buy 10 more Chromebooks, you know? It's an operational thing. So basically, here's the field. These are the things you can and can't do, but you got to stay within these sidelines. Going back to the football deal analogy, excuse me. And at the end, what we want is the purple one. We want our ends to be fulfilled through this. So this is basically, like we said, the delegated pre-approved safe zone. Are we saying that he's got to do all these things in the green zone? No. Are we saying that he can surround himself with people to do it? Yes. This is what we want. You figure out how to do it within these parameters. This is a quote or a sentence that I love. The board establishes the ends and sets the limits, then the board gets out of the way. You know, and as we set these policies and as you go through this, you'll see where we give them what our desires are. Here's what we want you to do, but we don't necessarily tell them how to do it because that's his job. But I love the fact that we'll establish, you know, the ends and we'll set the limits, we'll do the boundaries, and then we get out of the way and watch him do his work. Proscribe means, and I had to look this up to basically here, Rob, not care, basically let go.
Well, the proscribed one is where you say you cannot do this. This
Well,
is
you
what
prohibit it.
do not.
You say, no, you can't do it this way. You know, never tell people how to, Patton said, never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. You know, what's our role? We identified, you know, the end result, the objective, the end zone, using the football analogy. Our ends 1, 2, and 3, and those are at different, you know, they're on our website, they're public documents where you can see what our ends have been established as. You know, we set the limits, you know, to get to those ends, this is the autonomy we're allowing you. You know, and we refrain from directing the operational details, the plan of action, because like I said, we don't want to be the ones that go and order 10 chargers for this iPad, or, you know, we go and order 10 desks or 10 of these tables. It's part of the whole plan, which he has his team that helps him do those things. You know, that would be stopping it.
Some high-tech graphics here.
You know, we just want you to get to the objective there.
All right. So is everyone good so far? Any questions? We've gone along. So principle 5, superintendent performance and actions must be monitored rigorously by the board using criteria established in policy. So monitoring is what we consider a reasonableness standard, right? So has the superintendent made reasonable progress toward our desired ends? Has the superintendent avoided unacceptable situations or conditions, reasonably complying with the parameters as defined in the executive limitations? What we do is we try to compare what is to what ought to be to determine, has there been reasonable progress toward that? And last year, to make it less of a guess for us, the superintendent basically said, here's what I would like to achieve in the end, based on your end's policies. Here's what we'd like to achieve over the next few years. Each year's the improvement we'd make. And we then, as a board, decided that is either reasonable or not. So we said, yeah, that's reasonable progress. So it's really easy for us to monitor now, because we know by this year you want to be here, by this year you want to be here on all the ends policies. Principle 6, the board speaks with a single, clear voice. It's a one-voice concept. We don't want this. That's a funny graphic too. So here's an example. During the meeting, all voices are heard. For those of you that have witnessed board meetings, you know the board should take the opportunity to speak. In the end, there's a decision that's made, and the board's decision was. That does not mean that an individual board member can't express how they voted, what they felt, that what their feelings were on it. So a board member can say my vote was, but in the end, the board supports the decision of the board. It's a democratic decision through voting. You have to have 3, and if all 5 board members are there, you have to have 3 votes in order to pass it. And so we have all said when the board makes a decision, we're going to support that. Doesn't mean that I can't say my feeling was this and my vote was no on that. That's okay. But in the end, if I'm going to go and undermine the rest of the board and say, I think it was a bad decision, I don't think they should have done it, then I'm not being a good board member if I do that. All right, principle 7. Board decisions should be policy level decisions. So policy would be a plan or course of action intended to influence and determine decisions and actions. What we do is make sure that our policies are in writing. And by doing that, we provide clarity. And so there's effective communication when it's in writing. Deliberation, that makes us think about it before we speak. Like there's often times where we'll have the discussion in a board meeting. Well, what does policy hold us to as a board in this situation? It's a commitment to, the board decided. If the policy's already been set, it's easy to say that the board decided this because we've got it in writing as policy. I love this one. It avoids amnesia. You didn't tell me. Okay, we ran into this a lot before policy governance. There was, and not necessarily you didn't tell me. That wasn't probably often said to us as a board, but I don't recollect that discussion. That happened a lot, right? And so when you have policy written, it can't be claimed. And then protection. It protects the superintendent and the board against individual renegade board members who maybe want to come in and have their own agenda. Maybe they are coming in with a special interest group that they're trying to be a voice for. And so policy governance holds us to those standards so that that won't happen, hopefully.
Principle number 8, policy should be formulated by determining the broadest values before progressing to more narrow ones. Every time every policy, if you look at our policies, they start with a broad statement. It's just an overall, overarching,
This is EL 6,
okay.
yep.
This is EL 6, and this is how it would read if you were to look it up. Budget execution says, with respect to execution of the budget and the actual ongoing condition of the district's financial health, the superintendent shall not cause or allow a material deviation from the annual budget or budget policy adopted by the board. Cause or allow any fiscal condition that is inconsistent with achieving the board's end or places the long-term financial health of the district in jeopardy. So that's pretty vague. That's what we want this EL to read. It's kind of like the sidelines. That's how every single one of the policies starts. Then you get much more detailed, much more specific. You know, it'll proceed to therefore the superintendent shall not cause or allow, and that's where you go into individual items. Even though it's an overarching, a broad statement, it gets it very specific. Shall not cause or allow, 1, a failure to settle payroll and debts in a timely manner. You know, if you'd have read just the broad statement, you maybe wouldn't have thought that that's part of this EL. That's why it starts with a broad statement, then it gets much more concise or precise in nature, and it delineates specific things. Remember, the broadest values first, then progressively greater detail, enough to communicate the board's intent, but not one step further. Again, we tell them, this is how we want you to do it, this is what we want you to do. You tell us, or you do it however you got to get there, but stay within these parameters. And that's our voice as a board, our voice as a community who we represent, to tell us this is what when we write a policy, there's input from other people. It's not that Jen's going to wake up one day and say, I'm going to write a policy because I'm Jen Stevenson, I think this is how it should be. She's either had her ear pulled by somebody, or, you know, she's been at a meeting, she went to a conference, this is working at another district, can we implement it here? You discuss it, you talk about it, and that's how in the end, a policy is done. But not a step further.
So, stop there for a second. So, for instance, if there was a policy that maybe the community in general, we were getting feedback that, you know, when it comes to the budget, there's a specific item that we feel like is not being paid enough attention to. If that was brought to the attention of the board could then say, we're gonna add another line to this EL to deal with the concern that our community has. And so that would be a way for our community to use the board as, to make some changes from the policy perspective. Then the superintendent has to show us that how he's being compliant with that policy.
We can change these policies at any time by vote, but we can propose at any time to make a modification. There's no specific time. I mean, there are specific times that are, hey, we're looking at this one and this one and this one right now, but, and those are all done annually, each one in its own little schedule, you'll see later, but, if we discover or realize or at a conference or go, oh, that was a big mess up, we need to fix that, or that was missing or something, we can change those at any time.
Principle number 9, the board should define and delegate, not react and ratify. Superintendent shouldn't be asking, what has the board already said? Should be asking, what has the board already said, not what will the board say. Again, we're being upfront, we're telling them what our expectations are. They're in a written form, they're in policy form, and again, it avoids the amnesia, it avoids not being clear, because he's got to read this, he's got to give an interpretation of what he thinks this means, and how he puts his plan of action to get to the end result. Again, just another graphic, the means, the ends, those are all the available means. This is the end. Again, we put the executive limitations on there. That's his zoned.
And this is just an example. We have actually more than 8 ELs, but this would just be an example.
16.
16 ELs.
I think.
The board defines the boundaries, then delegates all the other means, all other means and decisions. Just another visual of how this actually happens. Principle 10, the board establishes its own culture using policy statements, Mr. GPs, and BSRs, which are board superintendent relations.
So we don't get into, this presentation doesn't get into our board policies. we have a handout at the end of the meeting to give to everybody that are our policies. But the board policies, we don't just have policies that tell the superintendent what we expect. We have policies that tell us what we expect of ourselves, and also what we expect of our relationship with the superintendent. For instance, that one person can't go to the superintendent and try to get something done. It has to be a collective voice to the superintendent for the superintendent to act on it. The governance policies talk about how we'll act in board meetings, about our attendance, about our involvement. And so we hold ourselves to that standard, and we monitor ourselves all year long too on how well we're doing with those policies. All right, so if you were to look at our policy manual, you're gonna see the ends and the executive limitations that guide the superintendent. You'll then see the governance process, or GP policies, and the board superintendent relation policies, or the BSRs. Those guide the chair and the rest of the board. The GPs also, the board superintendent relations are big guidance for the chair. GPs are really for the entire board. So monitoring then. So the policy governance cycle, and Jen just spoke this a little bit, but let's just say, for instance, EL 15, mandatory policies, that's one of our executive limitations. The board originally set the policy, right? The staff then does the work. We monitor that. In this case, it's monitored every April. We judge the results after it's monitored. So the superintendent will give us a report saying, here's how I did. And then we, as a board, say, all right, did we feel that he did a good job with that? Or, and the word we use is compliance. Was he compliant with the policy or not? And then in the end, we review that policy. And if we feel like, okay, we need to change the verbiage of that policy to be more clear to the superintendent what we want, that would be when we typically do it. But like Jen said, we can do it at any time during the year. That's just the normal cycle of doing it. So we'll never, sometimes some of the policies like this one, mandatory policies, all this says is that when there are policies that are changed because state law changed, then the superintendent needs to update those, and those are district operating policies. Well, if we just ignored it, and because it's, probably never gonna change, right? Then we tend to not be hitting some of our policies. But we have a cycle, so we always hit every single policy all year. And then this would be an example of a cycle of cycles. These are not ours. I didn't ask Dr. Hurston to change all these to match ours. You did do it?
Yes, we did.
Oh, you're overachievers. So these are our policies then. So this is how we monitor them at different times of the year. Sometimes our policies are monitored in a way that we know we just got something from the state that can provide some answers for it, and so we monitor it shortly after that. So it's strategic. That's why they're not all in order, 1 through 16. So this would be an example then of a board calendar. Is this ours too?
Yes, it is.
So this is the first page of ours. You put all pages in? No, you're not that overachieving. Thank you for not being. So this would be an example of what our calendar looks like. And if you just look, I'm gonna stand up for this, but, so, the way we have our calendar set up is, right after our board retreat, which we typically have in May then, this is our calendar of what we're gonna do for the upcoming year. It doesn't match the calendar year, it doesn't match the school year. But June 11th would be our special meeting in this case. There are no policy things going on, but a community forum. So we had decided at our board retreat, we wanted to have a community forum that day.
And that's basically tied to GP 1, 2, and 3, the linkage.
Yeah.
That's how we govern ourselves.
So that's a standard that the board chair is held to. Everything that's on our agenda has to be policy related. So we don't get off on tangents that really aren't about what the board does. Our discussions are around policies. Right after that then was our regular board meeting at 7 o'clock. We had policy governance monitoring report due. There were none in this case, but we had some policies from the previous board meeting that were into policy review for us to look at. And then we always have community input at the beginning. So if you look at that then, so let's go down to this one to give you an example. Our next regular board meeting, we changed some things around so there weren't any policies there. Here you go, Monday, July 9th, regular board meeting. We got a monitoring report from Dr. Hirsch on EL 6, 7, and 14. By the next board meeting, we went over then what we do a survey where we determine compliance. Okay, so that happens the next meeting. And then the next regular meeting after that is when we go over policy review. So this is all set up in our calendar for the year. So any board member and any community member can look at that and say, when are we gonna be talking about this policy? So this is a big difference from before policy governance, and it was kind of like it for us, but status reports efficiently delivered through the monitoring reports. That's what the superintendent provides. It's more time reflecting on ends and discussing key issues, and more time doing linkage and discussing community needs, stakeholder, and funder opinions. Funder's a funny word. So before policy governance, you'd approve the minutes, you'd go through all kinds of issues, many of them operational. I always love to tell people how we used to spend an hour and a half on the high school, what's the handbook, student handbook for the high school. We spent an hour and a half talking about it. And I remember we'd have discussions like, are we sure we want to allow rips in the jean that high? Maybe a couple inches lower? And then finally, when we got to policy governance, I remember the first time they came, because it was, every year we get this, they came with the student handbook and they said, we're thinking about allowing cell phones in the high school this year, letting students have cell phones. And as a board collectively, and we were pretty new to policy governance, but we said, all right, good luck with that, let's know how it goes. And that's how it went. And we said, I guess if it's not gonna work out, next year you're gonna come back and tell us you're not doing it. But we actually don't get reports on the student handbook anymore, because that's an operational thing. And if we were to put into our policies that we want to do this, this, and this, and part of this will be that students cannot have their cell phones, well then, that would be a policy that delegates to the superintendent. Students can't have their cell phones in the school. But then we'd be also crossing that line into operational. We try not to do that. So after policy governance then, you get the minutes. We deal with a couple key issues, and then it's about monitoring our ends, linkage, and developing our ends as well. So this would be similar to our format for monitoring reports. So Dr. Hurst would put the policy, he'd say whether or not he feels he's in compliance, his interpretation of the policy, what he thinks it means, and then the supporting information and data that supports his feeling of compliance or not.
So what are the benefits of the policy governance model? You know, there's systemic components to it, you know. Governing policies that guide the board and superintendent. There's performance standards for the board and superintendent. An evaluation format for the board and superintendent, you know, how, it's not just, you don't just talk it, you don't just put it on paper. You don't just come in every other Monday and gibber out here. There's actually a method to the madness. It is the core of a strategic plan that results for the students. A calendar of board work, agendas for the year, you just saw that. There's a job description for the board and the superintendent. Those are all benefits of the policy governance model. Each is in alignment with the other. I mean, they all coincide. There's a systematic process, that's a benefit of this. It's a meaningful superintendent evaluation process. Like Rob says, we evaluate ourselves. I mean, we're not just saying it to say it. We're always looking to better ourselves. It is a process for focusing on the results, a process for monitoring district operations, and hopefully we're working real hard on getting better at this, a process for linking with your community of owners. I know that I've been going on, this will be the end of my 4th year, and when I got here, these guys had just started this stuff. I remember coming to my first meeting, being here till like 12:30 at night, and they were asking George Ward, what's your interpretation of this? George would say something, and they would go back, I'm like, what in the world is all this about? So when Rob tells you that 6 years later he's learning, I'm in the same boat. You know, there's always stuff coming up, but I honestly believe that the benefits that policy governance brings, based on some conversations like Rod's even discussed tonight, where it used to be just a free-for-all, and there was nothing concise, nothing that really had substance to it, even though decisions were made, but it was never, you could never pinpoint, who did what, or how it got done. And I think these are all benefits of that. So collectively, it is a strategy for governing.
So, before I want to go back to ask those same questions I did at the beginning, but policy governance has created, I think, more work for me to prepare for meetings. Because now when we get monitoring reports, sometimes they're pretty lengthy, and we have to go through and really say, okay, here's the policy. What is the intent, and did the report show that the superintendent was compliant? What it has made is shorter meetings, but I wouldn't say it's made me spend less time with board work. It's more time probably behind the scenes, less time in the actual meeting, but the meetings are more concise, which is nice. All right, so where we are, queued up. So we're gonna go through these again.
I
Yeah,
have a question before we
Yeah.
go through. So you no longer have to deal with the operational, and you gave the example of the torn knees and the gene issues. At the same time, as well as the cell phone. I don't have personal issues about either one of those, but giving those, what happens and where does it come to you if one of those operational decisions now strategically affects the learning of the students?
well, it is in policy that things won't happen that affect the learning of children. So if the complaint came back to the superintendent, and it shouldn't come back to the superintendent right away, but through the process, if it ends up with the superintendent should look at it and say, okay, based on policy, is policy being followed by allowing this to happen? And if not, then he should determine that it's
Got to change.
it's gotta change, and that's up to him. One thing I've seen is appeals are almost unheard of now. We used to get appeals to the board all the time, because the board got involved in operational, and we didn't have set policies really that said, here's the expectation. But everyone does have the right still to appeal all the way to the board. And then the board would look at it, and we'd have our own interpretation of what the policy says. And it could bring about us saying, you know what, we need to modify that policy because we agree with the complaint that's coming. And then as soon as we modify that policy, now the superintendent has to say, okay, new language, now I have a different standard to follow. We've always had policies in this district, but if you look at all of our policies that are now called, when we set up policy governance, we renamed them district operating policies. When I got on the board, there were 3-ring binders that thick of policies. They're all WAC laws and RCW laws. So that's the state legislator saying, you have to do this. Okay, so then there's Washington State School Directors Association has attorneys that work for them that then draft a sample policy. They send it to us, and often then at a meeting, we'd have a new policy in there that says, hey, the law changed this year. Here's a draft policy that will make us compliant. We're not attorneys, so as a board, we go, okay, we'd approve it. Because we didn't feel we could change the language, it was legal language. It wasn't until we started policy governance that we as a board actually wrote our own policies that we felt like were owned by us as community members in this district. They weren't just told to us, here's a policy you have to adopt. So that was a big thing that I enjoyed, because I always said I wanted to write a policy, but in the old way, there was no, how was I gonna write a policy? It would have been kind of silly. They covered everything you could imagine with the legislative decisions. We went to policy governance so we could actually write policies. It was exciting for me, but I'm a little nerdy like that.
And back to part of that question of, if the superintendent doesn't fix it and it does come up because it's interfering with the learning of another student, and when it comes up for evaluation, we can determine that he is not in compliance, and that affects, his end of the year evaluation, his bonus, his possible renewal, when that's up, all of those things. So everything that's not all of these evaluations throughout the entire year, all gets condensed when we have our retreat that we discuss and evaluate the superintendent.
So I'll go back to the way it used to be, and I hated superintendent evaluations when I first 4 or 5 years I was on the board. We'd look at this evaluation piece, and they're basically whether or not you like the guy, right? And you'd rate them 1 through 4, I think, on this. And I remember I looked through previous ones, and it was 4 every single line, every single year. And I remember the first year that it wasn't all 4s. It was really hard on our superintendent to all of a sudden not be scored 4s, but I just like, well, I mean, 4 is outstanding. How can you be outstanding in every single area, right? But I still felt at the end, I said, we could be doing horrible as a district with educating our kids, and the superintendent still could get a really good evaluation, because none of these really ask about how well our students are doing academically. Now with policy governance, the evaluation happens all year long. In every board meeting, there's something being evaluated, and then it all comes into a summary at the end of the year. And it's always public and always done in public. The only part of the evaluation not done in public is when we sit down and explain the summary to the superintendent beforehand to say, is there any questions you have? Do you feel that this is a fair assessment? That would be, those are appropriate for executive session, but then we come out and we share all that information with the public. So, and the superintendent's evaluation before, completely behind closed doors. It was never made available to the public that I remember. So, I mean, kind of scary for a superintendent, I think, first coming in, but I really think superintendents who have high standards and are okay with being held accountable are okay with policy governance. If you've been used to being a superintendent who said, just could tell your board, here's what I'm doing, tell them what they needed to know, not really ever be held accountable, policy governance is probably a pretty scary switch. So, I'm gonna ask these questions again, and we'll see if we get the same responses. So, budget review and approval. This wasn't really talked about in our presentation, but most of the time I saw head nods on this, and budget review and approval is just something that's expected of school boards in Washington State. So that's a yes. Develop an operating plan. Now some of my old yeses are saying no now, and because we don't get into the operational part, right? We delegate that. How about develop a strategic plan? Mike and I were talking about this one. I think you could probably go either way on this.
Isn't your strategic plan your policies?
So yeah, so that, great, good job. So that really our policies set what we're expecting. A strategic plan, the board doesn't have to create it, but it should be created based on what our policies say. And that's actually, our current strategic plan was based on our ENS policies. There was a process, a consultant came to the district, worked with staff, administration. There was a couple board members on that committee, and some community members, and came up with a strategic plan, but it all was based on our ENS policies. So to say we develop it might not, it depends on how you'd interpret that, right? We definitely had a part in it, but we didn't develop the plan itself as a board. Report progress to owners.
Of course.
So I would say on that, we have an expectation that progress is reported to owners, but do we as a board actually do the reporting? I would say that happens in the board meeting, and that's made available on board docs, but that's done by the superintendent and staff. We don't put out a separate piece of information to our community reporting the progress.
I thought you reported the superintendent's evaluation.
Yeah, but again, that's just placed in our board docs, and it's just there where all of our other documents are, so I guess that would be.
It's still a report to owners.
We created.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to say it's a yes or no on that one, it's just how you look at it, right? It gets reported, we expect it's reported, but do we directly report it as a board? Not always, so. Form subcommittees of the board, that's actually in policy, that, and one of our GPs that says the board will form subcommittees to do work to help inform the board, but not make decisions for the board, so. So is there any other questions about the presentation and policy governance in general?
Ken's available to answer all those.
Was it confusing, did you think, or is the concept confusing, or is it fairly straightforward?
No, the concept's, okay.
Is it possible to bring up our last policy review we had at our last meeting, at least this Google for it, and show what our policy was and the compliance?
You want the report,
The response
the
document?
response document, or the review?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, we can bring up that.
Sorry.
So do you feel like the board does or doesn't do what you had thought originally?
I thought you were gonna do more, but should do more.
You thought that we should do more than what
I
we
think you
currently-
should do more and be more involved,
than what we-
because you're not letting the owners know. The owners are the voters, right?
Yeah, I don't think that it's getting out to the voters.
That's been,
And it's because, I mean, part of it was we don't have a communication way to get out to anyone anymore. Not that people will always read the paper, but it's not getting out to people. Staff even doesn't know stuff that some people in the community know.
the most difficult part, Sharon, has been the linkage with the community. We've brainstormed a lot of different things. This year, we will end up having 5 meetings where we invite just specific groups to come. And I think those discussions have been good, but what I don't know is, does that group take it outside this room and talk to other people about it? We communicate through Facebook, through our website, through text messaging, through phone calls. We do so much more than we did 6 years ago, but I don't know if there's any higher level of understanding than there was 6 years ago. It's so hard to gauge.
Rob, is there a publicity position in the district? And why is that person not in charge of that operation of transparency of reporting what the board does?
So I can share, we do.
So, you asked, I think, 2 questions. You were asking about if the district has a publicity person, and then if they report for the board. Now, one thing I remember the dividing line. So the board, we are our own entity that we have to be in charge of our linkage with the community. The district has expectations about how they will keep the community informed as well, but it's not the same necessarily. We have standards for ourselves on how we let our community know about what we're doing as a board. And it's to keep it distinctly separate, that people have to understand that we are not the district. We're a board that oversees and delegates to the district.
No, I wouldn't expect the board to report how Ludicaga's math scores are doing. What I would expect the board to do is to communicate with the owners about a long-range plan and how that plan is coming to fruition and how the finances of that plan are working.
So when you say long-range plan for,
5 years out.
For
I-
facilities
For
though,
what?
or for financials?
All of the above that affects the school district. What are the facilities, long-range financial planning, okay, by year 2025, we expect to have a need for this, and this. My interest in the school board is because in the past, the school, Othello, whether it's the owners or the school district we're short-sighted. We build to here when we know the need was here. We know we need to get our math scores up to here. We'll try for here when they should be here. We gotta do this math program for our little guys, cause that's so much better. And then this program crashes, and there's this huge gap in the elementary school and the junior high. For both the district and the board, there hasn't been a lot of community and publicity and communication. The last bond issue, and I am a very dedicated voter. I do not miss elections. I didn't receive or hear about the single item on that bond issue. And I have been on committees in the past to pass bonds. And yet, I was shocked at the number and how it was displayed on the ballot. So I was hoping to find out how the board communicates with the public.
so the board might be able to jump in and help me with this. So I think there's 2 different things you're asking there, and this
Yes,
is,
it
this is
is.
where the hard thing is to distinguish that line between board and district operations. The board communicates through our policies. If you were to look at our ends policies, you should be able to also see, are the metrics in with our ends, your metrics? So we've got the board's policies for our ends. We've then got the superintendent's metrics for, by first year, second year, third year, what should be achieved to reach those goals.
And that deals with attendance and teaching formats and grades and achievement in student learning, and there's many different aspects.
Citizenship, all kinds of that stuff.
Sure.
We also started live broadcasting all of our meetings, our regular meetings, so that we could communicate that, so any people at home could even get on to find out what the board's doing.
You can't
Our-
hear it, Rob.
Well,
You
we've
can never hear it.
struggled,
I have listened to many, I just started coming, 'cause listening doesn't do good.
we've
You can
struggled
never
with
hear
that part of
people.
it, I understand.
And that's the communication problem we're talking about. People take the time to sit at their house for an hour to 2 hours, and you don't know half the stuff that's being said. So, you want people to be involved, but you're not. And you can't say Facebook all the time. I've been to the meeting, we'll do Facebook, we'll do Facebook. Do you guys realize how many people don't do Facebook?
I'm one of them.
Okay, so, but you
Well, that's
already
why
have the information, but.
We put it on the website, and I don't think we should do, and we don't do everything just on Facebook, and that's why I think that we shouldn't, because I know there's some people like me who are on Facebook.
And it's hard to read it's hard to get on the district site and figure out how to get there. There's no explanation unless you've been there several times to find what you're looking for. Board docs are very hard.
So it's good to hear about the audio in the meetings.
It's terrible.
This is the first time anyone said anything to me personally outside the boardroom.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
Jen,
constantly saying that to him.
All the time,
Outside the boardroom.
I heard her
Move the
say,
mic into your
move the
mouth."
mic, speak into the
outside the
microphone."
boardroom, you guys. I've heard it in the boardroom.
Okay.
I'm saying nobody's approached me from the community saying anything about us, but we need to know those things, so.
I'll come over every day and tell you.
All right, absolutely. I mean, but I'm not going to be the one, I'm not the technology guy who's gonna come back here and make adjustments to
No.
it. All we can do is say, we're still getting this feedback, and then, so, honestly, the board doesn't have anything to do with that other than to say, we need to improve that.
But you're thinking that you're really getting out to the public, and you're not. You're not any more to the public than you were before. That's okay. People tend to think you're trying to hide this stuff.
So they think that we're,
You know,
Messing with the
because
audio
we
on
can't-
purpose
no,
so no one
no,
can hear
I
us?
don't know.
Oh.
Some people have said it to me, oh, they're not talking on purpose loud, or it's not, I mean.
No, I don't believe that, but.
No, and I don't believe you have, I've been watching you, but I mean, some people's voices protrude louder than others.
Really?
Some people do, they need to have the mic, even when they're sitting up front. Not everyone has the mic to this position where you can hear it.
Jen's really good about reminding us to keep that mic in
And she
front of
has
us.
her voice that comes through very clear.
I'm loudmouth, yeah.
No, it comes through clear because that's what people
Oh, I
want to
am
hear.
also loudmouth, that's really fine.
So,
Senior project happened.
yes,
They're not
the
the
board.
same way.
Chris wanted to speak to the district communication piece.
Just since that was brought up, I would just say we're always looking for feedback on ways to improve. But since you spoke specifically about the bond, I would say that we started off February 2016 with a community forum that we invited everyone to at McFarland Middle School. We sent out flyers as well. We went to all the businesses, as many as we could. We went to about 80 different businesses. I personally sat down with the business owners. We sent out robocalls, we put it on the website, we put it on Facebook. So we actually have a district director of communications that helps us put together a communication plan. So whenever we're communicating, we always follow that plan, and we always have multiple venues. So if we're not reaching,
I was surprised I didn't get reached. I
Right.
guess that was
we also
my-
have a vision newsletter that goes out to every person in the community.
I had to hear it from Erica.
Right. So I will say that we communicate in multiple ways, multiple venues, and we utilize that plan all the time. But of course, we can always do something better, so we always solicit feedback from owners or voters or stakeholders on how we can do a better job. But for us, we have a very specific way of communicating all the time. So it's not just Facebook. We realize that there's only certain people that will get on Facebook. So that's why we use the other venues as well. But again, we solicit your feedback, and anyone can call me or email me and just let me know, hey, Dr. Hurst, we're just not getting the word about this. I heard this from my daughter. Can you do something else? And I can share with you. I've told people I'll be willing to go out and talk to them personally at their place of employment or whatever to share with them the information. I've been to churches as well to share information. So with the bond, we over-communicated, but I do think that there was some gaps there with the Yes campaign. So moving forward, there's certain things that the district can do. We can't tell people to vote yes, but we can say, this is what our bond is, and this is what you can see on the ballot. But the vote yes campaign needs to go out and say, okay, this is what we need to do, vote yes on this campaign. So there's things that we own as a district that we could have done better in communicating, but we did a lot during that February 2017 bond. But we can always improve.
Was it 75 businesses, groups, churches, organizations that you visited?
Yeah, we actually had a list of about 80 businesses and churches that we touched bases with personally, sat down with them and talked to them about the bond and visited. So we over-communicated.
Honestly, that bond was, I've never seen that much communication from our district on what the bond was. I saw more communication on the bond, from the bond promotion side of it, on previous bonds. But the district can't do that. The district can't go out and promote a bond. That has to be a community committee that takes that job on. And I've definitely, the bond before that, definitely, there was a lot more of that part of it. So that's maybe where you got missed.
Maybe, yeah. And
Other questions or comments?
how long is the retreat in May?
It's usually a one-day, the actual meeting itself is one day.
But
So the last
it's
few
been at
days,
Tony's.
last few years, we've gone up to Tony Ashton's cabin. We got up there Friday evening, meeting on Saturday, and then leave Sunday late morning. Meeting itself is one day.
So, Rob, I understand from someone else, I didn't really know this, that if it's in a local facility, more people could come. But when you're 2.5 hours away, people aren't gonna just be able to drive up there.
Yeah.
It is open to the
Nobody
public,
ever wanted
yes.
to come to our retreat until last year,
Yes,
so,
it is open to the public.
but it's
We are
open.
at a public location. We leave the cabin to go somewhere else so that people can attend. And, the audio didn't work. We recorded it, but the audio was,
Technical difficulties.
you couldn't hear it, you couldn't understand it.
And our intent isn't to go on a retreat to talk about it, but I mean, we keep good minutes, we recorded it, whether it went bad or not, but our intent isn't to go somewhere where people don't know what we're talking about. Our intent is just get away to really be able to, it's kinda nice to get away, we get to know each other a little bit that weekend and try to make our plans for the year.
How does going to a house when everybody's there quorum not become quorum?
We don't discuss board stuff.
That's-
We discuss family things and get to know each other better, and those kinds of things. We discuss no board things until we're in an open board meeting.
It's in our governance policies that say that we can't make board decision, take board action outside of a public meeting, and so that's a standard we hold ourselves to.
So Rob, how long are your school board meetings lasting? And give me an average.
I'd say to be honest now, they're probably 2 to 2.5 hours,
Okay.
depending on if there's an executive session or not.
And given that, how many, maybe I could hear from, you told me that you put in a lot of time. How much average time do you put in to review the material and prepare for the board meeting?
Probably not fair to ask me, I'm the president, so there's some other expectations of me,
Okay.
but other board members.
Jen, how much time do you put in? Because I'm
At the
gonna
beginning-
subtract 10%.
At the beginning, it was like 5 hours, pre-meetings, because there was
And they're
lots and lots of
every other
documentation.
week?
Now it's more like, between 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Okay.
Prior,
But the meetings have been smaller. They've been
Yes.
a lot less time-wise.
We are sent out the information a week before.
no,
The
Friday.
Yeah, well.
The
if
Board
it's
gets
one
it the
meeting,
Friday
Oh, I guess,
but
yeah,
before.
For
technically.
policy review or anything like that.
So you get it on Friday and then you,
We review it over the weekend, and then Sunday night, it goes live to the entire, the public. What do you ask?
So if you're meticulous, it's a good 2-hour read at a minimum. You know, a lot of times, you kind of know what the section has, and you kind of, you're focusing on some stuff, but when you get a 74-page report, and that's gonna determine compliance on something, you can't just skim through it. You're looking for pertinent specific items in that, EL or that policy that you're gonna rate, compliant or not compliant, so it's not like you can skim through it, you know? There's board meetings where you look at, hey, it's gonna be a short one, you might do it in an hour. But anymore, it's like, there's a board meeting every other week, but there's a workshop of some kind, there's a school visit, there's always something going on, so, it's time consuming.
There's a site visit to one of the schools every month when school is in session. We're probably at least 5 meetings this month, if not more. And then this one's already double stacked, so there's this one, and then there's supposed to be another one starting right now. But you're all welcome
Dax
to
is
stay
running
for
late, so
facilities.
we can talk more.
Right, so, every Monday night this month, and then the first Tuesdays when we go to site visits, and those are 3 hours at least,
7:30 to 10
yeah.
in the morning.
I think it's fair to say, with all the meetings, that you're easily putting in 20 to 25 hours a month in board work.
And then people that come and talk to you.
And that one's, yeah, that's on top of that.
happen?
It depends on each person.
Jen, she's putting
I
about
have
another
people
20
in
hours a
my
week on
office.
that.
Just gonna go incognito. I do.
I just wanted to buy something.
And we had a conversation, yes.
That depends. That depends on what's going on in the district and the issues at the time. Sometimes there's more than others. I don't want to kid anybody about it. When I first got on, I was told 2 meetings a month, piece of cake. Was lied to.
But it must not have been so bad, you're still here.
I love the work. I love the work, but it was different than what I thought I was going into. But I didn't agree to it just because I thought it was only 2 meetings a week, couple hours, so that was my reason.
Any other questions or comments?
Give some time. People aren't here for the next board meeting or the next
Christie might have answered the question, did some of my questions.
workshop yet.
More questions will come up as you're thinking about things, and you can text, email, call, any of us.
So on the 25th, next Monday, we're going to be going over the applications and then determine who we're going to interview.
Is that public too? Like you're gonna be
That
like,
will be an executive session. We're not going to say anything bad about you, Eric, out in the public. We're going to.
I just didn't know if you're gonna Hunger Games everyone.
No, after that, then we'd set up the times for when we do the interviews, and usually we just try to do those interviews back to back to back. Then again, we have an executive session to discuss the candidates, but then we make a decision in public. Haven't come up with a timeline for that yet.
How long is a term?
So, my understanding in this case, because of the time frame, it looks like we're gonna be appointing, whoever is appointed, if they wanna stay there, they'd have to run for an election midterm, which would be this November, and then finish out the term, which would be 2 more years.
Typically, they're 4-year terms, but that District 4 position, which will eventually turn into the open seat position, is the same schedule that
Yeah.
Ken and I are on.
Sorry, I didn't answer your question. They're 4-year terms.
Yeah, but can you just hold down this till November?
Yes, but if you want to run in November, then you have to almost immediately put in for that you wanna run.
I think
Whatever the time
that
is.
time frame expires sometime in May, that you have to
Okay,
be on the ballot.
right.
And do you have to be a registered voter to be on the ballot?
She's Canadian.
Hunger Games person?
That's an advantage, thank you very much.
Well, are you a U.S. citizen?
No, I'm not.
That's a good question. I'm not sure you can run for a public office if you're not a U.S. citizen. I'm not positive on that one.
I can
Aren't you?
text
You're-
Heidi,
Are you, but your husband is, are you not?
but that doesn't mean that she
No.
can if he's not. If he is, so what?
She can run.
He
By
can run.
proxy.
Do you have dual?
No, I am not a citizen, I'm just a permanent resident.
That's nice.
Yeah,
It
I'm
is
not-
what it
I'm
is.
not sure what the law is on that.
Okay. And then one other question, you can't be a teacher in the district, can you?
So you can't work for the district and run for the board. You'd have to quit your job. If you're on the board, you can make up to a certain amount of money over a certain amount of time. Like if you want to be a coach, I think that you could be a coach if you're on the board. And they can't hire someone, same rules for your spouses, your immediate family. You couldn't hire your spouse to be a full-time. No, sorry, yes. If your spouse is a full-time employee, you can get on the board, but after you're on the board, they can't hire your spouse as a full-time employee. That's how the law states
I don't
that.
think that's a problem.
So we've had some board members, well, we have two.
Tony was.
It was 3 at one time that have spouses who worked for the district because they already worked there before they ran.
Not Tony, sorry.
It was Stewart.
Stewart, thank you.
And Mike and Juan all had.
Abby was the nurse. I was trying
There
to come
was.
up with the S word and that wasn't coming out right. Okay, Ken, I asked the county auditor, I think is her title. Can a non-citizen but permanent resident run for an elected position? No. Has to be a registered voter living in the district, have to be a citizen to be a registered voter.
Okay, that's what I
So
thought.
Chris is gonna be here next week.
Except in California.
Except in California.
You can vote for school board.
Oh, I was talking about in Adams County, so, which is where we reside. Thank you though for the California info.
I was just, that's the first thing
Essential.
that popped up when I tried to look for it.
So, okay.
What are attendance requirements?
Can't miss any.
Oh,
I think that our board,
I like to go to Hawaii in February.
Hold on, there's a policy
hey,
for that.
if there's attendance requirements, Tony would have been off the board a long time ago. No, it's, the policy states that you can't miss 4 in a row, which I think is actually pretty loose. That's 2 months worth of regular meetings. It's only regular meetings.
No,
There's
I
not
think
a.
it actually says 2 non-excused meetings in a row, you're kicked off.
We changed it, didn't we?
Oh, yes, I'm gonna say,
That's right.
I don't know what you're talking about.
It was
because
for forever.
I know
They
what I'm
changed
talking-
it.
But I will say that, I think we looked, there's nothing in state law that says you can, how do you kick off an elected official? It's like an impeachment or something like that, I don't know. So,
So that's.
it would be as more
policy.
of a reprimand and kind of
non-
embarrassing, I think.
2 non-approved misses.
It's never been an issue, it's,
Right.
you know, sometimes people
If they
have
don't
to
wanna
miss
be on,
and-
it's obvious, they don't wanna be on.
Yeah.
You have to tell the board president that you're not going to be there.
Oh, vacation is, I mean, people.
Those are excused, right, it's
People
like-
miss so
people just don't
infrequently that rarely they even ask me for an excused absence, they just figure they're okay.
Because they
'Cause
want
it's
to
in
watch
a
a
row.
football game. That's
Nobody
not
does that.
excused, right?
We have board members that just watch it here in the past.
So you probably should add that on your application. Are you a U.S. citizen?
You're right.
Yeah, 'cause I totally added Janice, no one would have ever known. I mean, unless they really knew.
I could get deported if I, it's true, I read about this, about trying to register yourself as a voter, or,
Canada.
I know, life could be worse.
Your GP says it declares the position vacant after 4 consecutive unexcused.
Really?
Thanks
Okay.
for that, nice, Jen. Where did you come up with that too, when
I swear I
unexcused?
read two at some point.
Yeah, the GP states that, but again, fortunately, we've never had to.
If somebody doesn't wanna be on, they just say, I'm done. And then they get.
I was just
someone else
curious,
is-
Hopefully.
as far as like traveling and that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
what's allowed and what's not allowed.
No. Fortunately, there's 5 of us, and so, and it's only an issue, we do have a policy that states that we have to have 3 yes votes in order to pass things. And so we've had situations where there's only 3 of us there, and so we've said, well, if it's not unanimous, then we're gonna be bringing this back next board meeting, so.
You've done a vote by phone with Tony before, cause only 2 were present, and Tony had to call in to make a vote. So you guys could.
Vote by
pass
proxy.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it was.
The payroll one. Yeah, that's really infrequent that we had 2 this year, I think, 1 meeting, didn't we? Yeah, the great thing is you get paid for your meetings though. But I will tell you that
What?
we've always, since we started doing that, we donate it to a scholarship fund for students, so. I'll just be honest with you, if you're the one who decides you don't wanna do that, probably not gonna look that good. Anything else? Well, thank you guys for coming to this. Thank you for considering putting your name in the hat for the selection, and whoever does it, we look forward to your interviews. I'm sorry that you can't.
I'll be back. I might become a citizen.
Awesome.
We'll see.
Cool.
See if
Well,
I-
now you just got a reason to. I don't know if you had a reason before, but now you have a reason to become a citizen.
Maybe Chris, till you can get your citizenship.
Well,
Me-
if
they
we
have
were to
had
move
that,
back
it's
to
been a while.
Canada and own a business, then the IRS, we'd still have to file taxes in the US, which really irritates me. So that's my only reason why I'm
And
not.
I had just met some people that could only be here so long, they have to go back, and then come back. Yeah. So, I do understand that.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next meeting, is that open?
All of our meetings, if there's a quorum, are open unless it's executive session or an exempt meeting. And exempt meetings really are only for contract negotiations.
So this is the continuation of, from the meetings that we had, that we proposed to the board, that you've made your own decision on what you think to.
This
I
next one.
didn't quite follow that.
What?
So-
She's talking about the next one
The
today.
facility
Yeah.
meeting.
Right now.
People,
Oh.
the facility committee gave you guys our recommendations.
Yes.
You've gone through it once, and you're gonna
Yes.
go through it again.
Yes.
What you guys feel is the most important.
Yeah, so based on the recommendations, and the board gave some, asked our architects and construction management to come back with some numbers so we can dig into it a little bit more and figure out what can we do sooner, what should we do later, and so.
Do we need to go to a bond? Do we need to do something else?
Don't wanna rent a room?
I have a house, it's in District 4.
Oh. I got lots of options coming up.
You rent a room in my house.
Okay,
I could probably use the farm too, because we have a house out there.
It's true. You're all over the place.
We should look and see what Burlington Road does.
thank you guys again for coming.
Thank you.
And if you have any
Welcome.
questions,
Listen to this part.
feel free to ask us at any time.
We'll stay and see what this is like.